2024 UK general election is over and we have a new government, an overwhelming supermajority with over 400 seats in the Houses of Commons of the UK Parliament, Labour and the new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. But what now? What does a Labour government actually mean for the EU? What does a Labour government mean for EU businesses, for UK businesses trading amongst each other? Goods, services, the likes. I asked you on LinkedIn to ask me your top questions about the change in government. And you did. And here I have selected the top 5 questions that you've been asking about customs and global trade under the new Labour government. Let's get right into it. And hello, just up here. So the top 5 questions that you asked me and that you wanted answers to. Now, we're less than 24 hours past the UK general election 2024. So everything's a little fresh, but hey, I'll try my best to tell you, what I think the answers to your questions are. Now, who's given these questions to me? Well, customs managers have, import-export professionals have, European businesses have, Dutch, German, French, Spanish businesses have sent me messages and said, well, what does the Labour government mean to my business? Some businesses that asked me questions were from a manufacturing background. Some businesses in the EU were from a food and drink producing background. And that matters because the answer of what Labour is going to do in the next 5 years as the new UK government vis-a-vis the EU matters depending on the type of business that you are. But I've also received messages from UK businesses that are looking for opportunities to improve the trade relationship that they have right now and to ease the regulatory burden known as red tape. And some have asked really practical questions. What is going to change? Be specific in your reply. Don't be political. So I'll try my best to do that. So today, on the 5th of July, less than 24 hours after the results were announced, this is what I think. Here are the top questions asked by my clients about the new Labour government. Let's go. How will trade change? How will customs change between the EU and the UK under a Labour government? 5 questions. Let's go. Question number 1. Will a Labour government want to rejoin the EU? Very good question, very clear answer, and never, no, zero chance. In fact, Keir Starmer himself, the new UK Prime Minister, has ruled this out 24 hours before the closure of the polls. So even before the electorate passed their vote, or people voted, he made it clear, if you vote for me, no going back into the EU. So this is off the table. It would also be very, very complicated, probably would require another referendum. And then who's to say the EU is even going to let the UK back in? So this is a no-go. There's no capacity, there's no willingness, there's no money to change all the laws back to the EU. And the EU has changed itself so much that this is not even something where there would be bandwidth to contemplate. Because if you think it is painful getting out of the EU, you try and talk to Ukraine and Moldova and Georgia and all the others of how difficult it is to get into the EU. And in the end, there's always the French, and they'll always say no. So the answer is, nah, don't go there. Second question, will a Labour government want to re-enter the EU single market or the EU customs union? Now, you know that the EU single market and the EU customs union is one of the big prize gains for any country wishing to join this form of regional cooperation, this EU construct. The EU single market allows businesses to trade freely amongst all EU member states. Now, there are 27 member states, from Estonia to Poland, from Ireland to Greece. And once you're in it, you're free to trade, sell, and buy as you wish and please, which means if you're a country like Malta, which doesn't even have 1 million of inhabitants, joining the EU will give you access to a market of 430 million people. Now, that's a big deal. So the economic powerhouse that is the EU is really, really attractive. But of course, with benefits come obligations, and there's a lot of regulations and rules that you would need to align to and meet and match in order to join the single market. And therein lies the problem, because of course the UK wanted to disengage from all of that and disconnect from all of the rules that are set by the European Union in Brussels. And that would mean the UK would need to adhere to all these rules again, which they don't want to do. So no to single market, and therefore, regrettably, no to the EU customs union. And that's important because if for companies in the EU or the UK that file customs declarations and that deal with payments of customs duty, you know what a pain that is. Before, no need for customs declarations, just go. Between Germany and France, just go. Between Italy and France, just go. No need to consider anything. But when you are not in the customs union, you have a different customs regime, different customs processes, and therefore you do need to file lengthy customs declarations. And if you're not sure what a customs declaration is, then, well, that is like a tax return, except that you are not filing it every quarter or every year. You're filing it multiple times every day. And you need quite a lot of expertise and knowledge in order to do that. That's why many companies choose customs agents, such as myself, and talk to experts in the field to streamline that as much as possible. But while we want to do away with all the customs declarations if we could, unfortunately, Labour made it clear that for the next 5 years, you're still going to file customs declaration. So great question. Thank you. See what the third question is. Will we still need to adhere to complex rules of origin to trade freely? I guess that means trade freely with the EU or the UK. And the answer is, well, if you're not in the customs union and you're not in the single market, then that also applies. So you may remember that when the Brexit deal was announced, there was a provision that said no duties, no quotas, free trade. And everybody thought, well, that must be meaning that everything is as it was before. But what we did forget is that the EU's position has always been it must be more beneficial to be in the single market and the customs union than it is outside. And that means while you can get some simplification when dealing with Europe or the UK, it is not going to be as seamless and straightforward as being part of the club. So the benefit of being part of the club is that rules of origin and customs declarations go. Not being part of the club means you have to adhere to rules of origin. So this requires you to understand what the origin of your products are, and there is a complex set of rules that determines that. And only if you meet these rules can you then import into the UK free of duty, if that's of relevance. So there's quite a lot of considerations that need to be thought of, including evidencing that where your product's actually from, and evidencing how you meet the rules of origin, and lots of little things that we can get into in another video and or training. So please reach out if you're in need of help with rules of origin or customs declaration. So the answer is yes, nothing changes under Labour. Question number 4, will we still need to file customs declarations? Of course, that would be the next logical question then. And the answer is yes, you do, as I have explained. If you're not part of the club, then there will be customs declarations. And yes, there are ways to simplify and change that. Simplify, maybe not that much. Digitalize is probably a better word. So what I mean with that is now we are using the power of AI, and we're using the power of integration, data integration, to more seamlessly move data from one ERP system into a government system and get the messages back. So there's automated back and forth, which simplifies customs filing, provided that the data is correct. But in many cases, there is no such provision. So companies don't have that set up unless you're really large, and they rely on agents. And agents such as myself then have to file it, and that can involve copy pasting exercises from one screen into another. That can mean also wondering and wishing for the data quality to be correct and accurate, and having quite a few conversations with the business on what that data should be like, what valuation method we know we need to have, what UK commodity code should be used, the net mass, the gross mass, the Incoterms, all of that kind of stuff, the description of the goods, what method of payment of duties, all of that needs to be codified and then informed to HMRC into their computer system, and then the computer says yes, or the computer says no. So that process, that lengthy process under a Labour government will still have to continue. There's no change here. And that brings you then to the last question, and that is, what does a Labour government actually want to do to make trade between the EU and the UK easier? Because so far, I've said absolutely no to everything. The first 4 questions, I said no change. So what actually is going to change? Well, that's a brilliant question. So Labour has said we can't go back into Europe because we literally just came out. That means we'll have to file customs declaration, we'll have to deal with rules of origin, and we're also not going to go into the single market and the customs union due to practicalities, but also due to the political message it sends to the country saying, well, through the back door, we're going back in. And don't forget, the likes of Nigel Farage now got elected into parliament, and they are going to have a feast with this. So if Labour is seen too much to go into Europe, then Mr. Farage is going to jump on that. Well, he's going to jump on that regardless. So it doesn't really matter. Now, what Labour says, though, what is the pragmatic and possible way to manage trade going forward? And what is possible is to focus, in my opinion, on combining the Labour manifesto with the trade agenda that the EU and UK businesses have. Now, that sounds a bit weird, but what I mean by that is we are in the business of trade simplification, facilitation, and removing bureaucracy and red tape. And that's something I think a Labour government can rally behind. I also think that one word that defines the Labour plan is stability. And that means, in particular, economic stability. It doesn't say growth, but it says more stability. So what does stability mean? Well, stability can also mean reduce restrictions and frictions at the border, make everything more smooth, reduce the costs, making goods flow more easily, removing restrictions, removing friction, gives predictability that the food that we need to get into the UK from Europe will enter the UK freely. It means that there is an expectation that orders will be fulfilled according to time schedule, to agreed timelines, and goods not being stuck somewhere in a border control post or at customs, and therefore deadlines cannot be met because there is a problem with paperwork. All of this needs to be removed. So removing friction and red tape is going to be the way forward to bring economic stability, aka the Labour manifesto, to Britain. And that is good for Europe as well, because Europe needs urgently to get better relations with the UK. And the most tangible example that I can see is the signing and the agreement of a veterinary agreement, the veterinary deal. I cannot stress how important that is to food trading businesses between the UK and the EU. The UK has suffered for, what is it, 4, 5, 6 years now, ever since Brexit was implemented, by having to complete expensive, complicated export health certificates, pages and pages and pages of documentation to state that the fish we've caught in UK waters is safe to consume by European citizens. That is a massive paper burden for British companies. At the same time, we've introduced the same the other way around. Since January this year, we need export health certificate to bring EU food into the UK. And that needs to be signed by a VAT in Europe. And VATs are reluctant to sign EHCs in many cases. So you have to rely on government officials and outside sources to certify that the food and the feed and the animals and the plants that you produce are safe to eat. So get this, the same sausage that I produce and I sell in my local supermarket in Germany is good enough for the Germans to eat, but it is not good enough for the UK people to eat. So I need a certificate that says it's okay. So this is all a bit strange because last time I checked, the Polish sausage was fine to eat, and so was the Cumberland sausage in the UK was fine to eat. And the jam, when I get beautiful English jam on a Greek island served for my breakfast, then that's safe to eat, of course. So isn't that a bit of an overkill to introduce all of these export health certificates and require pre-certificates and whatnot? So therefore, a veterinary agreement is on the table and must and should be negotiated and concluded as soon as possible to do away. And that would be such a relief and a reduction in regulatory burden that would be very tangible and doable. Now, that's what Labour wants to achieve. And there may be other things like visa simplifications or chemical agreements and things like that. But it all sets the precedent of how we work in the future together. It is goodwill in restoring the trust that was shattered over the last years that will get us there. But for this to start, a Labour government would actually have to, first of all, engage with Europe and showcase the commitment that Labour is committed to a better relationship than it previously was under the Conservatives. And then we can talk about detailed discussions about veterinary agreements and whatnot. But this should be the key priority to focus on. Now, I will say just one last thing, and then I'll leave you be. And that is to make a veterinary agreement happen, there is one big hurdle, and it's called dynamic regulatory alignment. And I want you to hear it from me first, if you haven't heard it yet. That's going to be a stumbling block, because the one thing you will not get around in Europe is that everybody has to have obligations and benefit. And this cherry cake, have a cake and eat it, is never going to work in Europe. So we need to get over this, that we can march into Europe and demand. The time of demanding is over. In the UK, we are well advised, if we are interested in a closer relationship with Europe, to understand what regulatory alignment and specifically dynamic regulatory alignment means. Because there's no way we're going to sign any deal unless we in Britain unilaterally by our elected officials agree on dynamic regulatory alignment. And the Labour government is well advised to explain to the electorate and every UK business what is regulatory alignment and what is the difference between that and dynamic regulatory alignment. And the final point is this. This word means nothing to most people, or these three words mean nothing to most people. Yet they are the crucial element that can make something happen or break it. Because it is so unknown and misunderstood, it can be exploited by those that wish to do us harm from the inside, that are not interested in any closer relationship with Europe. The Brexit people will make it very difficult for us to understand what actually means regulatory alignment. So my suggestion to the Labour government, if I may, but they're not going to stop me. This is my video, so I record it. But also to the EU is to make sure you do not repeat the Brexit mistakes and let the narrative be hijacked by the extreme right. Because I tell you, before you even say the word regulatory alignment or dynamic regulatory alignment, they have already put out a tweet and a video and a social media campaign telling you how bad that is and how destructive that will be for Britain. Be smart and understand the benefits of dynamic regulatory alignment for the UK. We've got at least 5 years to sort this out, and businesses need to lead in order for us to get this done. I am ready to lead and support businesses in making a veterinary agreement happen. I will not get tired of explaining dynamic regulatory alignment is a good thing for Britain, but everybody needs to play their part. So this is my reply to the 5 questions that you so kindly put to me on what does a Labour government mean for customs and global trade and the trade of goods between Great Britain and the United Kingdom. I thank you very much for your attention. And if you liked this video, please give it a thumb up, subscribe to the channel, and share it with those that need to see it. Until next time, thank you very much. Arne out.